some flowers that follow the sun. There are two types of flowers that follow the sun. There's one type that has a way of tilting the head with some kind of glands that contract and expand, and the other kind grow larger on one side, which bends it towards the sun, and then it grows larger on the other side to follow the sun around. The ones with the glands that turn to follow the sun are heliotropic flowers. And there's a reason for this. Buttercups, mountain buttercups, Arctic buttercups, have a temperature difference between inside the flower and in the air around. About 8 degrees Celsius, 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Difference. Warmer in the flower because it follows the sun. Why? It's all about sex. Because it's warmer, the bees like to come there. Not just to get the nectar, but they're more active when it's warmer. Insects depend on temperature to get moving. And they don't create their own heat, so there they are. So, the flower encourages the bee to come. And of course, when the bee comes getting the nectar, it also redistributes the pollen and pollinates the flower, and then the flower has offspring. So it's a lure. Following the sun, warms it up, brings the bees, creates more cute little buttercups all over the place. There are some basic drives in all of creation. Food is one, sex is another. Prestige and power, but often prestige and power are just so they would get more of those other two things that we're looking for. Influence, doesn't matter what it is. Often, everything we grasp for often comes back to those basic needs. Approval is an important need as well. We want to be approved of. We want to be liked. And those more esoteric things like approval and being liked, are things that are more important to humans than they seem to be to others, although maybe the buttercup likes to be liked. There you have it. But then, we let these other desires overrule us, and we end up hurting other people. And so, for that reason, we have the 10 Commandments, and a lot of other commandments. I understand when the missionaries went to Hawaii initially, they found out that translating the 10 Commandments into their dialect wasn't sufficient. Because when they got to number 7, you shall not commit adultery, they had a challenge because there was a different word for adultery depending on whom you were committing adultery with. And so they wondered whether they should break it down and spell it all out. The problem, of course, was that some people didn't know about some of those types of adultery, and they were afraid to tell them lest they'd be too interested in trying it. But if they left any of them out, well, then who knows what would happen. So there are some challenges to that. I remember a teenage girl telling me upon reading Leviticus, and in Leviticus you go way beyond the 10 Commandments. There's a whole lot of other rules and regulations in the book of Leviticus. And this girl who was about 16 or so saying, what kind of people are they that needs God to give them a law not to do that? She was disgusted at one of the things that they weren't supposed to do. I won't tell you which one it was for the same reason they didn't want to spell it all out in Hawaii, because you might think, oh, I never thought of that. So, who knows? When Jesus came along, he came into a situation where the laws had been around for a while. I thought it was interesting this morning as we were listening to the 10 Commandments. We heard that God's love will be shown for 1,000 generations of those who love me. And if you take it, I know that generations are often seen as 40 years in the Bible, but actually there's probably about 30 years between generations. And if you take 30 years between generations from the giving of the law to today, is about 1,000 generations. There you have it. We're at the end of that. But there are others of our ancestors who loved God, so we're still good. When Jesus came into the temple courts, the law of Moses was still there. The law still said that you shall not make any images of any other gods. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. Further, all the laws about sacrifice were there. Now, the laws of sacrifice indicated that when you were coming to give thanks to God, that you brought some of the produce of your land, something from the labor of your hands, and would offer that in the temple. And if you had committed a sin, you were to come and offer something from the fruit of your hands, a dove, a sheep, a goat, a cow, something. Offer that, a bullock rather than a cow, I think. Offer that to God in the temple. So we have a story today from the Gospel of John about Jesus in the temple. Now, Paul Faulkner was saying to me on Thursday, why did you put that picture on the cover? He couldn't see how two cute little lambs had to do with Jesus cleansing the temple. Well, I looked on the internet, as I always do, for pictures for the front cover. It's not a laborious task. You just type in the address of the scripture and click images, and you got hundreds of them right there. And amongst those hundreds of pictures for the cleansing of the temple, I could not find one that had Jesus driving the animals out of the temple. Every single one of them had Jesus with a whip, wailing the people, going after them. They're in all kinds of states of agony and fear, tripping over themselves, rushing to get out, coins spilling everywhere, doves filling the air, but none with Jesus driving the cattle and the sheep. And what does it say in the Gospel of John? Jesus took some cords, made a whip, and drove all from the temple, both cattle and sheep. Further, when you go behind the text, not behind the text, but back to the original text, to the Greek, the word used is ekbalo, which means to drive out without violence. Without violence. Jesus, when he was baptized by John in the River Jordan, after his baptism, the Spirit drove him out into the wilderness. And the word there is ekbalo. He was driven out into the wilderness. When people were brought to Jesus, others who were possessed of demons, Jesus drove the demons out, ekbalo. And Jesus never drove them out with violence. Sometimes we read that when the demon left the person, they were shaken and fell as though dead, and Jesus brought them, lifted them up by the hand. And there was the time when in the area of the Gadarenes, there was the person who was possessed of 100 spirits, a centurion of spirits, and or legion it was, a legion for we are many. And Jesus gave them leave because they pleaded to go into a herd of pigs, which drove the pigs crazy. They ran down the hill and drowned themselves, and so the demons died. But Jesus didn't kill the demons. So there's ever any violence in the use of the word ekbalo with respect to Jesus. But everybody interprets it as thus. Now, to be fair, when you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke says that Jesus drove the money changers and those who bought and sold from the temple. No mention of any whips, just that he drove them. And you know what drovers do when they drive cattle or sheep? They just touch them. They don't have to whack them. They just touch them. All it just lets them. The animal thinks that maybe there's a bee or something landing on them, and they get moving real quickly. That's all it takes. Just a touch. Just like those of you who've ridden horses, just like riding a horse. You don't have to make their flanks bleed with spurs to get them going. Just a gentle touch is all it takes. So Jesus was a drover of cattle on that day and drove them from the temple. Set them free, in fact. Now, there were some problems with what was going on in the temple that day. And it had been going on for a while. The high priest had decided that instead of having the money changers elsewhere, they should be in the temple. And why did they need money changers? Because when you paid your tribute in the temple, it had to be a temple shekel. And why did it have to be a temple shekel? What's number 2 of the commandments? You shall not make any graven images of any other gods. And what was on the Roman coin? Caesar. And what did Caesar claim to be? A god. All these coins with a picture of a god on it could not be brought into the temple courts. So you had to exchange it for a shekel so that you brought in a pure and holy temple shekel. And where did they exchange it? In the temple. So in the high priest's era, in that time, people were bringing foreign gods into the temple, into the holy temple, and exchanging them right on the temple premises. An abomination. The animals were not abominable. What you were supposed to offer, first of all, should have been something from your own labor. But people were not farmers, not herders, some of them, so they came and they bought something to offer in the temple. Now, you have to watch very closely for this, folks. Don't take your eye off the sheep. Right? They purchase this perfect sheep. The priest takes it, offers it on the altar. You're watching closely now. And then brought another one out for someone else to buy. And what was going on was those perfect lambs that were purchased for the altar, so the historians tell us, were set aside and a substandard lamb sacrificed and the beautiful one brought back out again. All under the purview of the high priest in the temple. The people did not like this. So it's no surprise that when Jesus came and started to shoo all of those people out of the temple precincts, that they couldn't do anything about it. The authorities couldn't do anything about it. Why? Because everybody was opposed to it already. And there would have been such a riot if anybody had gone against Jesus who was speaking at that time for the people. It goes deeper than that, however. Much deeper. Jesus came to cleanse the temple, to purify the temple, not to do away with the temple, to purify it. It had been defiled, and Jesus was making it not defiled. Jesus was getting rid of those foreign images. Jesus was moving the exchange of the animals outside and leaving that place for worship. But there was something deeper about sending the animals out. Because what Jesus intended to do was to offer himself as a sacrifice. And the animals then became superfluous. There was no need to offer animal sacrifices after Jesus offered himself. Now it's interesting that over the centuries, many people have used this cleansing of the temple as a justification for righteous rage, religious wrath. It's all right to go and wail upon your enemies because you're right and they're wrong. You have the high ground because you're holy and righteous. And Jesus did not do that. People see that passage as authenticating their own out-of-control rage. But Jesus did not do that. With the whip, he drove animals out. He scattered the coins that did not belong there. He told those with the doves to leave. He didn't kick over their cages. He told them to leave. All because he was setting the stage for his own sacrifice. So, when we have an opportunity to make a stand against something that we believe to be wrong, when we want to say to someone else, you're not following in the path of Jesus and you need to change the way you're going, we need to be prepared as Jesus was to take the responsibility and show the way. Not compel others or beat others into doing the right thing, but to show them the right thing. in gentleness, and in peace, and in suffering and in his own death, Jesus showed us the way. The freedom that on that day Jesus gave to those animals is the same freedom that God gives to us. Freedom from our own sacrifice. Freedom from our own suffering. Because the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate suffering, has been paid by Jesus. He opened the way for us. By God's grace, we follow in his footsteps. Amen.